This podcast is produced by The Brand is Female.
Always was, always will be. Aboriginal land. Always was, always will be. Aboriginal land. Always was, always.
Tanse, hello, my name is Shayla Stonechild, and welcome to the Matriarch Movement podcast. I am speaking to you from the unceded Coast Salish territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people, also known as Vancouver, BC. Every week on the show, I share stories of Indigenous women from Turtle Island and beyond to challenge the mainstream narrative around Indigenous identity and offer up a new category of role models so that the next generations may thrive. We'll put a spotlight on issues facing Indigenous women and explore how we reclaim our voice, our body, our power, and our spirit that have been silenced and stolen throughout history and humanity. If you like this podcast, don't forget to subscribe on the platform of your choice. Now, let's get to this week's conversation. I'm super excited for this first episode. I felt like I really needed someone from this territory to really introduce this podcast. She's been a friend of mine for a couple of years now. She was at the first official Matriarch Movement video and photo shoot, and she's someone that I'm constantly inspired by. I have with me today Sierra Tasi Baker, and she is from the Squamish Nation. She's Musqueam, Haida, and Hungarian, and she has completed her Bachelor's of Environmental Design at the School of Architecture and Landscape Architecture at the University of British Columbia, graduating with an award in design leadership and receiving a Youth Leadership Award for her work in the community from the city of North Vancouver. Sierra then flew to London, England, and graduated with her Master's in Science of Sustainable Urbanism at the Bartlett School of City Planning at the University College London, which is one of the top universities in the world for the built environment. Sierra was invited to meet the Queen of England in 2017 for her academic excellence at Canada House in London, England. So Sierra focuses on decolonization through design, and she combines Indigenous design and research methodologies, oral history, primary archival research, traditional ecological knowledge, story of place, trauma-informed design practices, two-eyed seeing, and Coast Salish design techniques to develop unique architectural and urban planning languages that reflect Indigenous sovereignty. Sierra is also one of the choreographers for Butterflies in Spirit, a missing and murdered Indigenous women's advocacy and dance group funded by MMIW advocate Lorelei Williams. So I'm in the presence of a Coast Salish powerhouse and someone that I'm super inspired by. So thank you, hi Sierra, for joining me here today.
Thank you. Kayachtan, my hands are up to you. Welcome to our territory. My name is obviously Shayla introduced me, but in our way we introduce ourselves as well, and it's also long-winded. So my name is Sierra Tasi Baker. My Kwak'wala name is Gesuqwaluck, which means creator or creative one. I'm from many nations. I'm from the Squamish Nation and also part Musqueam, here from MST territories in what is currently known as Vancouver. And I'm also from the Northern Nations. I'm Kwakwaka'wakw, Musgamagw Dzawada'enuxw, Tŷ ingit, and Haida on my father's mom's side. And I'm part Magyar Hungarian on my mother's side. So from many, many nations, and I'm really blessed to be from so many nations and have all these relatives on the West Coast. I feel like I'm related to the entire West Coast sometimes.
And speaking of that, what is one thing you wish people would know, even myself, because I'm technically a guest on Coast Salish territory, I mean, I'm Cree. So what is one thing you wish people would know about this unceded territory, whether you're a settler or an ally or just a guest?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. And one thing is I just love more people to ask those kinds of questions and what it means to reinstate host and visitor relationships. And myself as well, even being from so many nations, I'm constantly going between being a host and being a visitor, even in my own territory and even between our own original longhouse sites and village sites. And for me, it's about understanding that this territory has an identity. This territory has host families that still live here. I'm currently tuning in from the village of Sڵwx, from the Squamish Nation. And I'm really fortunate to have grown up in my territory and be born where my ancestors were born. And it's a really incredible feeling to be born into this host family, this host nation, and to be able to support our neighboring host nations as well and have all these kinship connections. And for me, it's about moving away from understanding unceded. Just in the land acknowledgements, people aren't really doing the further work. Like, unceded means this territory has never been, our authority has never been extinguished. We still, Xwiąxwx, our ancestral law, is still established here. Like, Xwiąxwx supersedes the colonial legal frameworks and dominion frameworks in this territory, meaning that this land is still ours. And I'm just going to say it, Vancouver is an illegal occupation. Like, that's just a fact.
Exactly. And I think that's something I've been toying in my mind actually recently is you hear all these land acknowledgements, but there's no real action or commitment behind it. And so if there was one action that people could do maybe on a daily basis, what would that be to support the people that were the first ones that lived here?
I get asked to do land acknowledgements all the time. And I'm going to share something I shared on a panel just last week, actually. I had this dream where I was, because I'm not only just an urban planning consultant, but I'm also a dancer, and which I think is very traditional. We always danced and done politics, and they've always been hand in hand and been diplomats. But in this dream, I was backstage, and there was this white woman who had asked me to be there, and in this dream, she had on like her headset, she had her clipboard, she looked very official. And she said, "Okay, Sierra, are you ready to go on stage?" And handed me the mic. "Are you ready to do the land acknowledgement?" And in the dream, I ended up having just a diva moment, essentially, and said, "I don't understand why I need to acknowledge that we're in my own home. You do it." And I handed her the mic, and she just looked baffled. And I woke up. It was a really short dream. And I remember waking up after that dream and just saying to myself, sometimes it's appropriate, but I'm not going to do land acknowledgements anymore in my own territory. And I'm going to ask the people that have invited me to do those acknowledgements. But there's a lot of discussion that acknowledgements are just the absolute bare minimum. And for me, I think I want to start hearing about not just a land acknowledgement, but pair that with your statement of solidarity with MST sovereignty. What are you doing to support our sovereignty? What are you doing to support our authority in this territory? What are you doing to support the fact that you're in unceded lands? What are you doing to be actively anti-colonial in your day-to-day work? And what are you doing to help us get our land back?
I think that's so important because I've always been saying that too. I think people think just because you're native, you're supposed to do the land acknowledgement, and I'm like, dude, I'm Cree on Coast Salish territory. Like, I can't do the land acknowledgement. It's not my job, but I also realize it's not your job either. So thank you for sharing that dream. I feel like dreams are powerful in just that sense. So that brings me to my next question. Is you said you grew up in this community, in this territory. What was that experience for you growing up here?
I love when I get asked about like my childhood. Like, I'm very, very fortunate. My parents made a huge effort to be cycle breakers. And like my parents' generation, I grew up in my parents' healing. And they made this huge effort to go to counseling, to do what they could, to make sure they were in a good position so they could go through that healing work. And it really shows in my childhood. And my father, who's my connection to my identity, just was so caring and loving in how he raised me. And I never received just a straight teaching from him. I always learned from how he acted, his graciousness, the way he comported himself in a room, the way he does speak to people. It's important to be always aware of past tense and present tense. And my dad is a master carver. My dad is Wade Baker. Xvíčwməthkվəy is his Coast Salish name, his Squamish Nation name. And I grew up watching him carve, and I grew up watching him create formline. And my first interaction I ever had with a computer was actually my dad teaching me formline. So I have a really interesting relationship to like what it means to be Indigenous in a city that just kind of grew up around us. Our village sites didn't really move that much. where our reservations are, and the city just sprang up around us. And being able to learn from my father and hear about his stories of growing up too, how he used to grow up with wolves that August Jack, Chief Solano, used to raise, and how he remembered when they used to live closer to the edge of the beach, and then they were forced or asked to move further up. And he remembered the stories of my great-great-grandparents and aunties and uncles, and how they were forcibly removed from our longhouse at Xaayda, and he remembers hearing those stories of being forcibly removed from Sığwx, and like it's so recent here in this territory, and so like I'm very fortunate that I've grown up with pride. I've never had to carry shame for being Indigenous, which is incredible. But then at the same time, I'm able to learn about what happened here, and colonization started here in 1792 with the early explorers coming here, and that's a whole other story. There's actually a really unique story, and I have a connection to that story. But in 1850, Vancouver was first annexed by the settlers. So that's only about, I think, 160 something years ago even. So that's, so recent. So we're very fortunate in that even though we have this gap in our knowledge basis from residential schools, we've been able to retain quite a lot of our oral history and our Sďwx, our ancestral laws. So I'm doing my best to learn those from my elders and my community. And I'm very fortunate to have grown up in this community that has done so much work to keep those good ways, those Sḳwx, those good heart, those good essence ways for our people and for my generation and generations after me.
Yeah, I think that's so important. It's amazing. It's amazing to have that direct connection to the lineage and to the stories, and also to your lived experience here in Vancouver, actually witnessing those changes within your father and also within yourself. And so my next question would be, when did it start? I feel like you were probably inspired by your parents to start decolonizing design, but was that something you always wanted to do, or how did that happen to you?
Yeah, so I obviously grew up with my dad just always fostering my creativity. My whole family is an artist family, is a design family. It would actually have been weirder if I wanted to be like a doctor or something. We're a very like entrepreneurial family. And my mom, she, from like the Hungarian Magyar influence, came over here and married my dad, and she's actually an urban planner. Like, we like to say her life before us. She was an urban planner on the East Coast, and when she came here and met my dad, they started a public art company together, and she started supporting like large-scale public artworks by my dad. So I grew up in this like really incredible collaboration between my parents, and seeing my dad put up artwork all over the city, like huge totem, like just very epic. Like I grew up on very epic parents. And so as I like grew up in this, my parents like fostered this creativity in me. They fostered me. I don't know, I used to be obsessed with this stupid toy called Playmobil, but like my parents just got me enough of it that I would create cities. So ever since I was little, I used to play with cities, and my dad would come over and ask me like, oh, like, how are you doing? And I tell him all these stories about this like huge city I started creating. And my favorite thing to do was to build it and then like destroy it with my dad. So that was like my whole childhood. And then, and they just like fostered so much creativity in me. And then when I eventually decided, I was genuinely deciding of like between going to dance school at SFU or going to going to UBC for design. And I ended up choosing design, and I'm really, really happy I did, because I'm doing both now. And I feel like if I chose dance, I wouldn't have been able to do design, but because I chose design, I can still do both. And when I completed my bachelor's and then I went to London, England to complete my master's, I came back and I told my mom, I really want to start an urban planning consultancy. What would we have to do? And she was like, just say the word. I'm like, what do you mean? And she's like, I kept all of my urban planning licensing, like all these years. I'm like, okay, perfect. Like, cool. All right, we are an urban planning consultancy now. She's like, cool. Like, so we just started back up again, and we obviously still do public art. My dad is an incredible public artist, but we're moving more into architecture, urban design, planning, landscape. And the reason for that is I feel like over the many years of growing up in public art with my parents, I've noticed that public art is almost kind of like that land acknowledgement. Like, oh, let's just slap some native artwork on this and call it a day. And I've been getting more and more critical of that. And so I went and got my degrees, and now I'm back and I'm saying, like, you can't just slap native artwork on the side of a building and say that's visibility. I want the entire process from the first design meetings you have to like the final construction and that like blessing opening ceremony to be completely rooted in Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh values of this land. And I want people to orient themselves, again, like I said, back to the host families. Like we are the sovereign families of this territory, and you have to be consulting us. Otherwise, you're just colonizing this territory and continuing colonization of this territory.
That was going to be my next question is I think, as Indigenous people, we kind of have our own view of what decolonization means. So really, what does the word decolonize mean to you? And then how do you do that through design?
Yeah, so I think, especially on social media, and also just in my day-to-day, I've noticed decolonization is becoming less and less meaningful. And it's really unfortunate because to me, like I have a very specific definition of decolonization in the work that I do. So when I was studying my master's in London, England, at Bartlett, I went ahead and studied the history of colonization from 1000 AD to present day. Because I need to understand this mechanism. Like, what is this monster that we're dealing with? To name a thing has power, right? So I followed this lineage of these papal bulls that the Vatican put through. I do an entire workshop on this, and the theoretical framework of genocide that has been upheld throughout the entire legal processes of dominion. Something called the framework of dominion that the Vatican was pushing for many years, and then it got upheld into science and Darwinism, and then that came over and started affecting design. And how modern architecture upholds anti-Black, anti-Indigenous racism, how it upholds colonial dominion frameworks, and also how these colonial mechanisms of genocide got upheld in the legal framework of the canon laws of Canada, and how that then got inducted into the institutional language and political and policy language that we deal with today. And there's this direct line that I found of Dominion language and Dominion frameworks. So to me, the definition of decolonization is to literally dismantle the framework of Dominion. So all those papal bulls, all that paperwork, that language, that entire framework that has been built around us that we deal with every day, that is literally built to enact genocide on our people and to enact dominion on our people. So that's point blank, decolonization is dismantling the framework of dominion. So it's unfortunate for me when people are saying decolonization as a metaphor, and obviously I do this too in my daily life, decolonize your closet, but but at the same time, when I say decolonize, it has that power behind it of I know what I am working towards dismantling. Maybe there will be better words too, I'm not precious about the English language. It's not our original language, and I'm happy to keep updating words and keep being on top of trying to trivialize and trying to lose the meaning of these words and come up with new words.
Yeah, I felt like I was really focused on decolonizing, decolonize your closet and all these little things. But then I was like, wait a second, I don't feel like what my decolonization view is really rooted in the way that you are mentioning it right now is what systems are we literally dismantling and how are we doing it? And can you study the history to know that how we got here? I feel like before I can really start, decolonizing something, I really have to take that time to know the history and also the history of the land that I live on. That's why I also am always inspired by you, because I have to admit that I can be ignorant to even though I'm Native, I don't know a lot of the stuff that happened to us outside of just what's happened through my lived experience. And so thank you for providing a framework for other people and the audience to hopefully start you know, even just dropping that piece of knowledge to, you know, ignite a light bulb within themselves. And so when you decolonize design, what does that look like? Because I'm like, yeah, what does that look like in your mind's eye?
Thank you. So I had to make this decision of, do I want to go the architecture typical, like be an architect's intern for years, get sequestered away at a desk and figure it out like later in life? And I was like, we don't have time. Like, I don't have time for this. So I started this consultancy with my mom and my dad, Sierra Tasi Baker. And I guess like 2 years ago, but this is a continuation of the work that I've grown up in for 25 years. It's the same company. It's because my mom just happened to keep all these urban planning. Just like, I'm like, why are you a genius, Mom? Like, how did you know? But point being is I'm developing this in real time. So I'm really fortunate that we are winning all these contracts and just trying to figure this out in real time. And for me, I keep being asked, can you just write up design guidelines for us? And I keep being asked, like, what are, like, Coast design guidelines? What are Musqueam, Squamish design guidelines? And I'm really cautious about that, or, like, even cautious about talking about, like, what is our process? And because there's so many culture vultures, there's so many people that, like, this is new. Like, this hasn't been done before in, like, the urban realm. And there's so many architects out there that are still, they still have like all these white cishet men in charge of things that are just trying to be like, hey, like, what's your process? Like, I want to know. And I'm like, no, like, that's not, I can't just hand you a piece of paper and tell you, like, this is Coast Salish design. And I have to be so cautious how I go about it. So that's why I've been having trouble. I think we talked about this the other day about being public about a lot of what I'm doing, but that's my goal, is to be able to start like really disseminating this and like disseminating these solutions that I found are working, because I don't want to create design guidelines or create a specific building and be like, this is Coast Salish design. I really want people to realize that each site is unique, and you have to be in communication with a real person from this territory to do this work. So like almost like I almost just want to be like, if you want design guidelines, you have to hire me or someone from Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh to do this work. Like, this isn't something I can just hand you and you go off, and that's appropriation. That's appropriation then, and that's like handling that situation. So it's a lot of responsibility to ensure that this work is being done in a good way. And for me, even like we haven't yet fully realized all these projects that have just started. From last year and this year. And for me, like, until I actually sit in like a completed design that I've worked on, am I actually going to know if this works? Like, is this the right way to do this? Like me sitting on these design teams, ensuring that like we're rooting at MST values, but then no matter what, I'm still going to be sitting in a space that's concrete, or that obviously, like, we're incorporating like things like medicine gardens, traditional use, ensuring that like our spirituality, our values, our Sďwx, our ancestral laws are upheld in design. But until I'm sitting in my medicine garden, and until I experience like what it feels like to be in one of these designs, am I actually going to know if what I'm doing is working and if it's the right way forward? Or maybe there's something even more like, am I dismantling this the right way? Am I really getting to the root of this, or am I still helping a colonial body look good and feel good about that they're occupying our territory? So it's a lot.
Yeah, well, I was gonna say, you're literally like trailblazing an industry that it's never been done, really. That was gonna be, you kind of touched on it, is like, what are some challenges that you face in this line of work? You kind of touched on appropriation, but what is one challenge that you've had to face doing this work?
It's daily. Yeah.
A lot, probably a lot.
Yeah, it's daily. So like for me, it's just been self-care, like support from my partner. Like I have to make sure I'm good, like all the time. And I think that's the biggest struggle for me, especially like, I've grown up in my parents' healing, like I said, so I've had a lot of really healthy modeling of how to do that, but it's still difficult, especially when it's every day. And like a lot of the time I want to be like on the front lines, or I want to be supporting my friends that are getting arrested doing like sit-in work or land defense or water defense. But because of the line of work I'm in, like I'm sitting here at my desk and just like hoping that what I'm doing is the best way forward. And it's really difficult. I don't know if you can hear I'm getting a bit emotional, but so I think it's just that like need to really want to be like constantly supporting my community, and I do my best to do that. But then also because of what I'm doing, like not always being able to be on the front lines and supporting like my friends and the people that I care most about. And I remember when I was in London studying my master's, that's when Standing Rock was happening. And it was like it was such a big struggle for me because I just wanted to be there. I just wanted to be there and help. And that was a big learning curve for me though, because my mental health was deteriorating because I just didn't feel like being in the center of like colonial, the heart of colonization, and studying in this like colonial institution and like being like, is this going to work out? Is this like the best path? But then I got asked to do a presentation to one of the companies that manages quite a few of the people who fund that project, like those pipeline projects. And I was able to give a presentation to them and explain directly to these funders and directly to the stakeholders in the project, like, this is why you need to take Indigenous rights seriously. And it was just a very bizarre experience because I had to speak like that language of money to them because they weren't like, they don't respect our rights. And then it was just such a hard process too, like to be in that space and that meeting and have to like, okay, they're not listening to what our rights are, like our inherent sovereign rights, but they're going to listen to money. So it was a really bizarre experience, but I'm like, okay, like there's levels to this, like there's different actors in this that can do the work where we need it most. And it was just, London was really difficult, like on my mental health.
I think that's something I've also been learning. I can relate in a totally different way, is this burnout feeling of wanting to do everything all at once and also supporting your community and being there for one another. And people don't really see what's happening behind the scenes. They don't see the amount of work that you may be doing or the challenges you may be facing. And so I think moving forward is like, how can we support one another so that we don't burn out, so that we come back to community, so that we come back to the values of not always having to be running after. It's the capitalistic clock, essentially. Like they always want us to be in a state of doing and achieving when actually we need to be restoring and also resting. And that I feel like is also decolonization in itself. That brings me kind of to my next question is, what keeps you inspired and how do you reclaim your power when you are feeling burnt out or low energy?
Yeah, thank you. I've been trying to ask this question to myself for the past year. Something that I've noticed helps me the most is staying in my truth, or staying in the truth. And like, I'm very fortunate like that I've helped myself create this framework of understanding colonization from this like archival historical analysis too. And for me, like when I'm feeling really upset and like, kind of like I said, like the biggest challenge for me is getting in my head, like getting internal, like feeling like I'm not doing enough, or I'm not doing this in the right way, or am I doing this in the right way? And then remembering like, why am I struggling so much when like this emotional labor is the responsibility of the settlers, is the responsibility of the colonizers. And I remind myself, like, this weight on my shoulders is not mine to carry. That's the transformation work that they're refusing to do. And that transformation work that they're not upholding, like, we're literally trying to carry their weight, their emotional weight, like their unhealed trauma, like their shit. And when I remind myself of that, I'm like, okay, that's not my responsibility. Like, I'm out here trying to express Indigenous joy through design, like trying to express Indigenous solidarity through design, trying to express Indigenous sovereignty through design. It's not my responsibility to do their healing work for them. I can definitely point them in the right direction because I came across quite a lot of clues of how to do that when I was studying that history. And I'm also part Hungarian. There is a role to play on my Hungarian side as well. So I understand from that side of my family the work that we're doing and like the work that we've taken responsibility for. And that's what I think is a template for settlers and colonizers, is that they need to look into their own history. They need to stop thinking that they're in this like post-colonial period and that their predecessors were responsible and that they're not, and they need to take responsibility for their lineage, they need to take responsibility for their personal history, learn it, be proud about the cultures that their own families uprooted and that their own families rejected, and then they lost their ancestral teachings, and because of that they don't know who they are, they don't know where they stand. So if they can do that work to know where they stand, then I can actually have a proper conversation and be like, hey, this is your responsibilities in my territory and globally.
Yeah, I feel like that's also what I've said. I'm like, you need to do some inner work. Like, where do you come from? Who are your ancestors? Where is your lineage from? And what role did your ancestors play in the making of this history? And can you accept that so that you can then later be aware, so that you can heal, transmute, and transform, and then we can reunite? But it's essentially like nothing's going to happen in the world collectively if we first don't do it ourselves. So you've kind of already mentioned this, but who do you really look up to? So when you think of the word matriarch, I know you mentioned your mom, who kind of paved the way for you, and I can really relate to that. My mom also paved the way for the work that I'm doing, and she gave me her nonprofit number too. So I feel like our moms just knew what was up. They're like, but so what does the word matriarch mean to you, and who are some of the matriarchs that you are inspired by?
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, we're so fortunate, right? That like our parents are like very supportive, and like I'm really cognizant that that's not the case. And like for me, it's like I would love to like doing everything, hey, but like I would love to be able to eventually go into work of like helping families build capacity for themselves, and especially when I'm like from these coastal families, like lineage is huge, like, and building generational wealth and prosperity is huge in our culture. And all of that I learned from my grandmother, my late grandmother. So she's like the true matriarch of the family. Oh, just a note, like my mom is Hungarian, Magyar, and she's not Indigenous. But there is this word in our language for when you marry in, this really beautiful word for when you marry into the Squamish Nation, which is like her role. Like she still has a role. Like it's part of our Xwiąxw, and it's this word that essentially means like we're so grateful to you to have like essentially sacrificed the other lives you could have had to be part of our nation. It's such a beautiful sentiment, but I'll just continue. But my grandmother is a true matriarch. So Emily Nelson Baker, łaḳwagila, from Kwakwaka'wakw, Tጡ ingit, and Haida. She's a descendant of many chieftains from the west coast, and she was also a chieftain when she was 4 years old, I believe. Her village had been wiped out due to smallpox in Fort Rupert, I believe, that area in Kwakwaka'wakw, Musgamagw Dzawada'enuxw territory. And her father and the other chieftains at the time recognized her qualities when she was that young. And they were like, she will uphold our people. So because of survival, because there wasn't, like, those families were wiped out, she was then gifted 4 chieftainships. 4. Like, normally you hold 1 in your lifetime, and she was, I think, 4 years old and gained 4 chieftainships for the survival of our people and the survival of those coppers. And she's held herself in that way ever since she was born. Like, they saw that in her. And not only was she this 4 copper chieftain, but she was the matriarch. And that's such like an incredible combination to be both chief and both matriarch. And I learned so much from her. And she didn't speak a lot. Like, if anybody knows her, she was the queen of one-liners. But at the same time, like, everything I learned from her was just through being around her. Was just through like hearing how softly she breathed. Like, everything from how she moved on this earth to how softly she walked to how she held herself around other people. Like, that's how I learned our laws, like our way of being. She always said, be humble, like, be humble, be humble. And I think, like, I've thought a lot about that, like, as a performer, as a Leo, as an extrovert, as someone in the public, literally doing public design. I've thought about that a lot and just reminded myself when you come from a family of so much prosperity, of so much wealth, like, you don't need to say anything. Like, it's just about, and in our way, like, wealth and prosperity in the northern potlatch way, like, wealth is what you give. Like, you are wealthy based on how much you can give. You are wealthy on how much you can provide prosperity to your people, how much prosperity you can create. And that's why, like, when my grandmother, Tłaḳwagila, a copper woman, when she gifted me the name Gesuqwaluck, she said it meant creator, a creative one. And the beautiful thing about our names is they have so many meanings, and those meanings come to you throughout life. And that's by design, right? And I've been learning more and more about my name. Like, Gesu means to carve, like the root word, which I think is beautiful because my dad is a carver and he's the one who's been teaching me. And then it essentially means to carve wealth into this world, or to carve the supernatural into this world. And that's what I'm doing. I'm doing my best to carve into this world prosperity for myself, my family, my nation, and hopefully as many Indigenous people as I can. And even what I was talking about earlier, like carving out prosperity and these ways of being for many nations.
And so for many nations and many generations, speaking for specifically for the younger generation, what would your advice be to, someone that looks up to you, that kind of wants to do what you're doing? What would your advice be to the younger Indigenous youth?
I'm so inspired by the youth that are inspired by me. Like, the youth are our future. But it's interesting because I can only speak from my unique path, and my unique path has been going in and out of colonial institutions, colonial boardrooms, like colonial spaces, and really thinking about, like, is this the right space to be in? And I saw this meme yesterday, which was, forgive me, ancestors, for the tables that I wanted to sit at that you would have flipped. It's like thinking about that a lot. Okay, like, am I? So yeah, like, it's just be very critical, like, and I think first root yourself in your family, like your family's teachings, like root yourself in what knowledge you can find. And a lesson that I've learned through, like, my mom isn't just an urban planner, she's an archivist and a historian. And my dad is an oral historian. So growing up around, like, this archival, like, two-eyed seeing approach, which is, like, the archival...
Yeah, I was going to ask you what that meant.
Yeah, so, like, that two-eyed seeing approach of, like, my mom's, like, archival, like, sitting in there, reading every word, like, figuring out all the dates. And then my dad's, which is, like, the oral history, like, this incredible ability to memorize information without words or without written language. And growing up with both of that, realizing that I think a lot of there's this topic right now of, like, finding your roots and how hard that can be, and that's by design. Like, colonization intentionally ensured that it's hard to find this information, that it's against our oral history or our Indigenous ways of knowing. So it's even traumatizing just being in an archive or just trying to do this, like, research and looking at a bunch of graphs. Like, this doesn't make sense to me. Like, that's by design, and, like, for sure feel those emotions. But if you can work through it, or even if you can find someone who can help you with that two-eyed seeing approach, that information is available, even if it's really hard to find. What I've learned is as we were researching our family history, there were things that I thought would just have been, like, completely lost, and just surprising ourselves when we actually were able to find information. And a lot of the times we'd go into archives, and archivists are still, like, hiding documents from us. And we're like, hey, can we look at, like, the family trees? And, like, oh, we don't have those. And then I'd be like, okay, cool, great, thanks. And then I'd send in my mom, so without me, and she'd be like, hey, like, can I, like that, like, white lady voice, like, hey, can I, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, oh, sure, no problem. And then my mom's, like, texting me from, like, inside the archives, like, look what I found, look what I found, look what I found. And it's just really, how to explain this? Like, it's really hard to do this work because colonization is designed to make it difficult and to disappear this stuff. And it's about being realistic, but also staying in a space of futurism, like staying in that space of, like, this is how it is, but this is how it should be, and sticking to that authority and your inherent authority and, like, how these processes should be, but also recognizing how they are. and then dismantling and changing it and making it better. So I guess like my advice is like, oh, I don't even know what that is. Like, it's just, this is hard. This is hard work. Recognize that. Take care of yourself.
And I think, yeah, coming back to your roots, for me, I can definitely relate to not having that direct lineage or tie to those stories anymore because my father passed and because he went to residential school and he was in the prison system. And even when I tried to get, files from that, I couldn't. So it's, I mean, I recognize how hard it is for us. But I also feel like there's this, like your bloodline also is like innate within you. Like you cannot not have it. So I feel like even if you don't know as much, just your ancestors are still with you in a way that they've gone to the spirit world, but they're still here in your physical reality. So I try to connect and talk, and I have messages sometimes come through my dreams, like what you said when you had that dream about the land acknowledgement. I feel like dreams are also powerful, and there's also other ways that your ancestors can connect with you or send you messages too. And so that kind of brings me to my next question is, you mentioned this topic of Indigenous futurism. And so first off, what does Indigenous futurism mean to you? And then what do you hope it kind of takes or transforms here in Vancouver in itself? Because you are doing so much work around decolonizing design. So what does Indigenous futurism mean to you? And how do you see that within your own life here in Vancouver?
Yeah, thanks. I think even just starting with like what you're touching on about blood memory, and like kind of what I was talking about before is like just managing the emotional labor of doing that, like the Western way, the white way of things, and how hard that is. But then, like I said, my dad has taught me this oral history way, this incredible, and my grandmother has taught me this incredible oral history way, and like as I've grown up throughout my life, realizing that I know more than I thought I did. And my grandmother always told me she doesn't know very much, and she was so sad when she said it. And the more I've grown up, I'm like, wow, she taught me so much, like from just the way she acted, just the way she was. And when I would be at events and I'd feel like a reaction to things, like that's not right, and I'd be like, why do I know that? Like why is my body telling me something's off here? And then the more I'm doing this work, the more validated I am that like my body knows the protocols. Like our people have been here for over 809 generations, like my family. Like that's over 16,000 to 60,000 to 80,000, but that doesn't matter. That's just the white way of saying it, like since time immemorial. So like our bodies know these protocols. Like our ancestors have lived in these protocols for generations on generations. Like your body will tell you the way that our ancestors did things. So like I think that like what you said, Shayla, is so important. They had to talk about Indigenous futurism. Always, whenever talking about futurism, it's important to acknowledge that futurism was created, innovated, so on and so forth by the Black community and Afrofuturism, and just to recognize that Afrofuturism is this incredible technology that is innovated and continually innovated by the Black community to celebrate Black joy, Black spaces, and Black-centered spaces. And I think the most, currently the most visible Afrofuturism piece of work is obviously Black Panther. And it's about, and like in Black Panther, the premise is like, what would Wakanda, or what would an Afro-centered city look like without the influence of colonization? And I think that's just like such a powerful tool and mechanism. That's why I try and express solidarity with the Black community all the time, is that and also like in my analysis of the history of colonization, we're both affected by colonization. And to bring that solidarity together and be like, how do we dismantle this thing? Like, how do we dismantle this monster? And the Black community has some really incredible technologies. And like here in what is so-called Vancouver, we've been dealing with colonization for about 200 or so years, whereas in Africa and other places, it's been thousands. And even for like your nation, like the Nahiao Nation, like it's like over 500 years of dealing with colonization. So that we have a lot to learn from each other and how to dismantle these things. And for me, that concept of like center Indigenous joy, center like what would a a city look like without the influence of colonization? And you're like, longhouses, it would look just like it did like 300 years ago. Like, so like, how do we get back to that? Like, how do I ensure that I can have my daily practices? And I think with futurism, obviously it's this idea of technology, but what I've been learning from my elders is technology doesn't have to look like technology. There's this concept of traditional ecological knowledge, which is just a fancy English word for this incredible breadth of knowledge that we as Indigenous people have from living with this land for so long. And if you shorten that word, the acronym is TEK, so T-E-K. So I like to say that that's our technology, and that technology is in direct relationship to the land. And then I know there's so much to say about it, but I'm just saying what was coming to mind right now. But I was learning from this incredible Maori choreographer the other day at a Talking Stick Festival panel that I was witness to. And his name's Charles, and he was talking about how in Maori there's this word modi, which means like the spirit of things. You don't know it yet in Squamish Nation, but I think it's mostly like universal in across nations that we believe that all things have a spirit. And modi is like that spirit in Maori culture. And he was saying that even computers have a modi, and like all those materials of that technology are from the earth, that there's metal, there's electricity, like all of that is still from the earth, and there is a modi of that computer. And he was talking about how in Maori culture, there's these like concepts of the profane and the sacred, and we can interact with the modi of a spirit in either profane or sacred ways. And that if we rethink our relationship to technology and recenter our Indigenous ways of interacting with tech and technology, that we can really shift and disrupt these like technological spaces and recenter Indigenous ways of being. And I was like, wow, that's incredible. Like, that's a really good teaching.
Powerful. That's powerful.
So I was like really honored to bear witness to that teaching. And as a witness, it's important to like disseminate what you learned. So that's like part of why I'm sharing it. But yeah, like in terms of like technology and disruption, like we can center technology as much as we want. It's not outside of our culture. And I remember talking to an elder, microtastic. He was saying like, if we had microphones back in the day, we would have used them. There's like over 600 people at this potlatch. Like, like we've obviously learned to have huge voices because of this for years. Yeah. But he's like, yeah, that would have been great. Like, so technology isn't clashing with us as Indigenous people, and we can recenter it and reclaim it how we want to, because we've been innovating different technologies for thousands and thousands of years. It's not new to us.
I know that you have designed quite a few murals here in Vancouver, and so I'm curious to know, is there any way that people can support the work that you're currently doing or going to? And I also want to be mindful, I want to ask more questions about the dance group that you're a part of too, but I'll start with how can people support you in the work that you're doing?
I guess just like follow us on social media at Sky Spirit Studio. My personal, obviously, Sierra Tasi Baker, but a lot of like our solution-based thinking is on our Sky Spirit Studio accounts, and also the MST Futurism account. Definitely follow MST Futurism. That's where a lot of these like innovative ideas are coming from. And also, like I created MST Futurism because like my voice should not be the only voice in these conversations. I truly believe everyone should be empowered to talk about design, critique urban planning. And I think as Indigenous people, we need to hold these developers, these colonizers, these designers, these urban planners accountable and demand better from them. Like, I think what's happened is we don't realize that we can demand so much more from them than what they're currently giving us. And they're just giving us breadcrumbs. Like, hey, here's a public art piece. And like, we're happy with that. And like, no, like incorporate us throughout the entire process. Like, start building capacity. I think that's, for me, like supporting capacity for more host youth to be designers and more Indigenous people in general. Like, how incredible would it be if every single nation had like designers, urban planners that can design in their own territory from their own teachings, like what they want to see in that land. Like, what an incredible future, instead of always hiring out these white architectural and design companies to come in and try and like figure it out, and they have to like learn our teachings, and like we're not sure if that's like a good idea. Like, wouldn't it just be better if we just had all these Indigenous architectural and design firms that can do our own work for our own nations? Like, how beautiful would that be? So for me, like, capacity building, and then just like keep up to date with what we're doing. But for me, like, as much as you can support capacity for Indigenous youth getting into design, I think that's like the next trend I want to see. I think there's this great trend of people going into law. Like, I want the next trend to be like Indigenous youth being like, I want to be an urban designer, like an urban planner, or an architect, or a landscape architect, because there's so much power in that. Like, actually like working with the land and working from your teachings in your own territories. Like, that's my dream.
Yeah, no, that's a good dream. I'm gonna wait for it. I want it to happen ASAP. So that's one way that you can support Sarah in her decolonizing work. And yeah, just thank you for being the first official guest on this podcast.
Thank you for your kind attention, and thank you so much, Shayla, for including me and involving me. I feel really honored to be the first on your podcast, and I really honored that you asked one of the host people of this territory to be on your podcast to open it up. So, and you're doing great work. Thank you so much for having me.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and I would love your feedback. Follow me on Instagram at Shayla0H, at Matriarch.movement, and don't forget to subscribe on the pod platform of your choice, and review and rate where possible. I'll be back in a week. Hi. Thank you so much for tuning in.